I'm John Steve. This is Pod Have Mercy.
Russell.
This is Pod Have Mercy. Well, Matthew Marchetti, all the way from
Hi, guys.
the promised land, the Aggie homeland, is with us today. And you know, this is really good. I thought about you and doing a podcast with you in August and September because it's 5 years from Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey. So for folks who don't know or weren't here in Houston, Hurricane Harvey was probably for Houston. Well, I can't go back 100 years, but I would say it was one of the biggest storm events we've had in our history, dumping about 50 plus inches in 24 hours. So we already flood in Houston, major flooding, homes flooded, people stranded. I sent Jeff a lot of pictures, and I can send some more. So if you're watching this on YouTube instead of just listening, there'll be some pictures to remind us. But Matthew, what was interesting is I always tell people at Chapelwood, and I think people all over Houston, they just responded by what's the need in front of you. It wasn't a strategic plan. It wasn't like we had it all figured out beforehand. There were people stuck in their homes, and the flooding was not going to go away anytime soon. And so people just like, well, we need to go get people. I mean, it started as a phone call from a church member to someone who said, our power's out, we're flooded. And normally in Houston, if it floods, it goes away pretty quick. But this we knew was going to last 2 weeks. People were going to be stuck in their homes. So, people started going out. We had a group of guys from the church and started collecting boats. And that's where...
Dude, you were on CNN. You were like leading this charge. That's before I met you, and you were just out there.
But as I tell you, and I want Matt to talk about the CrowdSource, because what had happened was we were just responding to church members, right? And then when we would go, we'd find neighbors are stranded, and their neighbor is stranded, and we know someone else. And the big thing was people were like, well, where can we go help? And you tell us about. I mean, you were involved in all this with us, and then you established and started this thing called CrowdSource Rescue, which now has been used all over the world, I think, and helps people in these types of... So talk a little bit about not only Harvey, but what it is and how it works and kind of how you got to where you are.
Yeah, the backstory is interesting. I grew up at Chapelwood, a couple miles away. I didn't get very far, and was living a couple of miles away at the time. And I didn't really care about Harvey. I mean, I knew, okay, there's a hurricane, whatever. But it's just typical Gulf Coast mentality, which, whatever, it'll be fine. And for whatever reason, we're going to go right into the spirituality. The couple days before, God really just sort of speaking to me, like, you need to go and check on senior citizens at, after the storm at Chapelwood. Yeah, everything will probably be fine, but you should volunteer to do that. And I emailed Andy Cunningham and a couple of Chapelwood folks that said, hey, after the storm comes, like, I'd like to go check on them, make sure they're okay, see if I can help at all. And I had this, and I felt very proud of myself that day of like, I listened to God. I came up with the plan. I'm not going to be lazy. I was driving down Beinhorn. I took a turn too fast and I whacked into a telephone pole. And, the front end was all busted and it popped all my tires too, more importantly. And I got mad about it because it was just like, I had this plan. I felt like God was saying something and I listened. And then my car busted. How am I supposed to go check on these people without a car? Obviously, Harvey's coming. This happened on a Saturday, I guess. Harvey's coming. I left it in the parking lot where Southwest is, I think. I just walked home. So that, I think that's on Saturday. There's been so many storms. Sometimes I get my days mixed up. You're going to have to jump in and tell me where I'm wrong.
No, it was.
John.
We had a worship service on Saturday night, combined Saturday night, because we canceled Sunday morning church. It started that Saturday night late. Yeah.
Wow.
So I wake up the next day. obviously my little, I'm sure it'll be fine. My Gulf Coast hurricane bravado did not work out for me. I was riding around on the bike, just looking at stuff. And I, at some point we connect. But so I'm riding around my bike. I pull up to Boston Memorial, and it's just like covered in water. This bridge that I've driven, almost every day of my life is now 9 feet deep. There's a village fire department guy there. And I told him, I was like, well, hey, I was an EMT in college. Can I help at all? And he's like, yeah, we definitely need the help. Go down to the fire station, and just volunteer, tell them the same thing, and they'll put you to work. I was on my bike, and the fire station is like 4 miles away. But luckily for me, a guy was coming back with a boat full of people, and I was like, that sounds more interesting. I don't have to bike 4 miles away. And so I just got in that guy's boat, started going to some of the neighborhoods, helping people out. It's, rescue is kind of a strong word. It was like water-based taxi at that point. Because even at that, where it's like, yeah, this is pretty bad. I mean, little did we know there's going to be another 5 days of this. At some point, and this is where you could probably jump in, John, we connected, right? Because I remember I was starting to get messages on Facebook and stuff. And then we got on a text chain, and you were sending me addresses, and then somehow a group me got involved.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. This is the long story, by the way, because the CSR story, the origin story, and Chapelwood's very intermingled. So I think it was Fred and Donna Lowe, perhaps. You texted me or something. Somehow I ended up at your house that night.
Yeah.
And I remember we were at your house, and Buffalo Bayou was, a mile or two north, and we can't cross it. And Fred and Donna are on the north side of Buffalo Bayou. And I'm posting on Facebook to see if there's anybody on the north side who can go and get them. And they, I think, I might have made this up, but I think they at one point even called the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard was just like, I don't know.
You're not close enough to the coast.
Yeah. But, they're right on the bayou, and it's coming into the house. A boat came, but it didn't have a motor, and
we call that a canoe, man.
We more or less yeah. No, I think it was an actual, canoe, but it's Buffalo Bayou is going like 40 miles an hour now.
Dear
Whoever
Lord.
gets on that boat's going to need to be rescued. So it was like 10 or 11 at night, and we didn't do anything because what are you going to do? You can't cross Buffalo Bayou. And I went home a little frustrated. It was just sort of, pissed me off. Like, this is stupid. Also, at that point, I was in GroupMe and WhatsApp and Facebook messengers, and Facebook was going crazy. And I'm a little bit of I'm a tech guy, yeah, sure, but I don't know, I'm kind of boomer-esque sometimes. It's like, there's way too many apps on. But so I was talking with Oliver Carter, and then longtime business partner Nate Larson, telling him about some of this stuff. Nate and I are both programmers. We both, worked with Oliver at his real estate firm. So, on the programming side, maps make a lot of sense. So we just sat down. So anyways, it was like, this is stupid. Like, why can we not know that somebody is up in the north and go get these folks? So we start making like a little website. It was very simple. If you needed to be rescued, fill out a form. If you could help rescued, fill out a form. And there was a map that, stuck the two together like a crappy version of Uber. I think we finished it. Yeah, we finished it around like 6 or 7 a.m. And I texted the group text, and I think I texted you and Christian Washington and, some folks at the church. And we had put like 20 people in it. I took a nap. And then woke up at 9 a.m. and there was 1,500 people in it. And I'd also put my phone number on that website because, again, there's no grand plan here.
You should have put John's phone number on it.
Yeah, probably. It's very funny now. I mean, it's pretty funny. That morning, it was not funny because, you know, I had all these people texting me like, these awful stories of like, I'm stuck in the roof of my house, like I'm in the attic, or I'm this, like, can you help? Can you help? And I'm just sitting there. What am I going to do about it? I can't really say, what I thought, not on a church podcast, but it was very colorful with a couple swear words, but it's just, what the hell am I going to do about this? Like, we're screwed. 911 was going down that morning. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think HFDs used to 5,000 calls a day, and now they're getting 50,000 calls an hour. But so 1,500 becomes 3,000 becomes, and I'm just sitting there looking at this like, oh my God, like now I've really done, like this website's going to go viral and it's going to account for 0 rescue. Like this is not what I intended. And we're thinking about like just shutting it down now. But people started sharing it, and people started saying, well, wait a minute. Cause again, it's just 2 buttons in a map, like with no instructions on it. Just pulled the map up, said, oh, well, this makes sense. Started going with their own boats in their own trucks in their own neighborhoods. There was this app called Zello, like it's a walkie-talkie app, and I realized like I got on this app and saw this back and forth between people talking about like ID number 1415 has just been rescued, or I'm going on over to ID 123, and just started looking it up and was like, wait a minute, like, those are our ID numbers. Again, we didn't tell anybody to do this. This just started happening. And so that Monday at the end, I was still getting calls, but I started to get calls from people with boats and trucks and said, man. And I remember the moment because it was just like, it was this guy with the thickest Cajun accent you'd ever heard saying like, I got 40 boats, on the way. Where do you want them? And all this. And I rattled off a couple of areas. And then I sat in my office and I just cried because it was like, I mean, I started that day of like, we're screwed. People are going to die. To like, okay, there might be some hope here. That's incredible. Yeah. Well, that's the normally I tell that story in like a minute. It's like, well, I was out rescuing,
it's great. I mean,
members of my church, and then
the just to put it all in perspective, though, what people don't understand, if you were in Houston and yes, there were 50 some odd inches of rain in 24 hours. Yeah. People don't know Houston's built on a swamp, so we have the bayou system. We also have these reservoirs, these huge systems that hold water back. Well, those were potentially, so you have the first flooding, the flash flooding, that normally would go away. So the first night, Saturday night, my street floods and it starts to dissipate. That's what typically happens in Houston. But what was unique about Harvey is you have the flash flooding, and instead of it going away, the Army Corps of Engineers had to release water from the reservoirs because the reservoirs were in danger of failing. And if they had failed, you're talking about catastrophic life loss, homes. People don't know these reservoirs. These are huge earthen mounds that rise up and keep the water from overwhelming Houston. So when all that happened and they started releasing, well, what that meant immediately was all of these certain neighborhoods around bayous were going to be flooded, like 4, 5 feet, 6 feet of water, depending on where they were. And because of the release of the reservoirs, that water was going to be at that level for 10 days. Wow. So the water was not going to recede. There was nowhere for it to go. It was going to continue to be released out of the reservoirs. So that's what made this situation where we were unique, is that that we had all these people who were stuck. And even when we would go out to help people, we would come across someone who was in their house and like, no, I'm not going to leave. It always, it floods, but it always goes away. Well, and then the next day you'd leave your number and you'd get 5 phone calls from these people. Hey, can you come back? And so the crowdsource thing, and I think the reason why it exploded, it was a collision of an idea to help people You know, like you said, it was a simple thing that you didn't
simple.
expect to, but the need was so huge. And people had nowhere to go because you couldn't call 911. Like you said, 911 couldn't help you. There was no one to come help you. So it was neighbors helping neighbors. Well, you had people like us and a group of guys from Chapelwood. You know, we called us the Chapelwood Navy or whatever it was. And there was a Cajun Navy. That was what you were talking about. The guys that came over because they've done this before in hurricanes. And they had 40 boats and they're coming over and they're calling you saying, all right, deploy us. You know, you're like the admiral, ceremonial admiral of the Cajun Navy. And this is where we started finding, because once we got past the network collections of people in their Sunday school classes calling each other, we're going to get those people that we know. Well, and then you're running across people. Well, then it was like there were tons of guys, because every day we had more and more guys and boats show up. And we kind of ran out of all of our connections. Well, that's when we turned to CrowdSource and like, all right, guys, there's buttons all over, you know.
Let's go.
And you could if you were on that app, you knew that the group from Louisiana was going in this neighborhood, and so we targeted a neighborhood with our group. And I just think it's a fascinating thing and how it was birthed in this moment of need that was so unique to us as far as a catastrophe. But man, it really helped a lot of people. The stories of people who think about with families who are going to be stuck for 10 days in summer. Remember this is end of August, beginning of September, which in Houston that's our second summer.
Horrible.
It's hot.
It's horrible.
Yeah, and you got no power, no AC. Generators are not working because they're underwater, right? So there was one house we went to where there was an old, it looked like a locomotive in this guy's garage, old house, huge generator, and it's running, and the electrical wires, like the extension cords, are plugged into it and running underwater as we're going into the house. Oh yeah, I mean there was some scary stuff.
I don't know much about electricity, but I don't think that's a healthy.
Yeah, it doesn't do it. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, I want to help people, but I didn't sign up.
Mark Hauser, you get out of the boat first.
But I think the story is great, and you know how it blossomed and helped so many people here. But what was also interesting to me is how you saw then and leverage. I mean, since Harvey, you've taken this thing and you've been working with first responders, not just in Houston. Talk about like recently Hurricane Ian. I mean, was in Florida. Now I always follow your social media whenever hurricane season comes. Matt Marchetti's always like, all right, I'm getting ready. It's our hurricane season, you know, because this is kind of something that's taken off. This thing is taken off.
That's great.
And it's helping people all over the place. Talk a little bit about how you've seen it kind of expand and help in other spots.
So Harvey helped rescue around 25,000 people, which again, sounds very impressive, but I need to remind you, accidental.
25,000.
Did not intend to do that. And so we were just sort of looking at ourselves like, well, that was the craziest thing we've ever been a part of. It's pretty awesome. Then Irma hits 2 weeks later. People start using the site again. So, okay, well, round two, let's go. And then Maria, 2 or 3 weeks after that, and again, the same thing. And so by that time, it's like, okay, I guess this is the thing. You know, it's not just, a one-off with Harvey. At that point, we really start working on it and start, it becomes kind of this idea of like, well, you always have this after a storm where it's like neighbors helping neighbors is not new. But there is like sort of a consistent lack of coordination between that and first responders, in just some of these bigger, storms are getting bigger, and as they get bigger, 911 will go down, and when 911 goes down in these areas, that's when social media starts playing, and it just starts going buck wild crazy. Don't create a nonprofit at that point. It's still almost like this sort of like kind of side hustle we're doing at the end of the day. Florence rolled, so for 2 months afterwards, just hurricanes. And it's figuring out what this is. December, January rolls around. I get a call from HFD, And I'm sitting there thinking, like, I have 2 missed calls. You know, I woke up at like 10 a.m. Some developer asleep late. 2 missed calls from HFT, and it's just like, oh boy, this is it. They're gonna come in and yell at me. But they call me in. I meet with Chief Pena, and they're like, "This is awesome. Whatever you got going on here is awesome.
Wow.
Let's figure out how to do this." And that keeps happening more and more. Like, emergency management agencies start reaching out, and first responders start reaching out. We start redeveloping the website. Lawrence rolls around. This time we meant to do it. You know, we had 8,000 volunteers sign up, which were like 12,000 rescues, something like that. But we started noticing something at this point. So at this point, we have, you know, like GPS tracking and whatnot. And so 8,000 volunteers sounds like a lot, right? But for the most part, people are just doing, like, you know, in their own neighborhood, like really neighbors helping neighbors. That's great. But the people putting up huge numbers, like, you know, we're just seeing it on user data at this point. It's like one person rescued like 250 people in a day. How did he do that? So just start calling them randomly, like, hey, who are you? And it's all these just volunteer search and rescue teams where it's like, you know, some people like hunting, some people like soccer, some people like going out into hurricanes and rescuing people. Start working more with them specifically. Now, 5-ish years later, I don't know, I think it's like 17 hurricanes. I'm not sure how many hurricanes. It's been a lot. A lot of partnerships with emergency management. It's very much become this sort of hybrid thing. So like Ian, we activated right before the storm set. We had 7 search and rescue teams that we supported who were sitting there during landfall, all huddled up in a garage. As the eye passes, they start going out because we're already receiving tickets at that point. Start doing like the, you know, real middle of the storm. People need medical emergency. People need evacuation, or the roof caves in. That lasts for about 24 hours, and then as winds die down, the ground teams start coming in, and they're doing wellness checks, and they're doing evacuations, they're doing, you know. So anyways, at the end of it, it's about 1,500 rescued or accounted for. And so it's become very systematic now, and systemic. Part of that is that, you know, hurricanes are life now, it seems like. I think I even have a hurricane shirt on. I didn't plan this. It's just... but, yeah, it all started from that accident. I think it all started because I took a corner on Beinhorn too fast, accidentally. And then, you know, if I trace those steps back, where it's like now 5 years later, it's about, I think, 60,000 rescues or people that we've helped, however many storms, a lot of storms. But we did, you know, there was the freeze, which was a big deal, you know, general crisis, as well as COVID. We basically just set up same map. You needed food, you'd hit the button. If you could help deliver food, hit the button, and have done 1 million meal deliveries in 17 Texas counties, along with food banks to folks who don't have transportation, they're homebound. And I mean, we're still doing it now, but it was particularly important during the lockdowns in COVID, where it's like, yeah, but I don't have anything to eat, and I can't go outside my house, and I don't have a car to get there anyways.
What I always tell people, what's interesting to me is like how this starts.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look back, it's always like anything, I call this great, but anything great, anything that happens, and people look back in history and they say, wow, that was a great moment. How did you start at the beginning? And I know, like was telling about from our end, you're talking about how you took a corner too fast and you ran into a telephone pole, and you know, and those are not the kinds of great beginnings that you think of. But what I've always said to people is discernment, or doing the right Holy Spirit thing in your life, or whatever the Spirit thing is led to do, comes out of three categories. There's like three legs to the stool, right? There's a need, there's giftedness, and there's passion. And so when I look at the situation, it's like I didn't have any idea that I was going to be going in boats to people's homes. Never crossed my mind.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when we got word from someone that someone was stuck in their house, I put something on Facebook, said, does anybody have a boat and can go pick somebody up? I wasn't going to go. And then all of a sudden the next day I'm out in a duck boat, pushing it through, coming up to our chest water. Yeah. But I mean, what I'm saying is, so when people are like, oh, what you all did was great. I'm like, no one's thought they were going to be doing something great. You just did the next right thing. The need was there. The need was massive. And people were stuck, as I said, because the waters were not receding. And people were going to wait it out. So now they're stuck, And then the giftedness. Marchetti's he can program the hell out of stuff. I mean, I don't know what that means. I know how to open my iPad. That's about all I can do. But to create, you said a very simple thing that I could never even fathom on doing, which was like a crude Uber deal where people could sign, hey, I need help, or hey, I'd like to help. And all of a sudden you aggregating these, say you have the giftedness to do it. And then I don't know if it was a passion in the moment, but what you did have a passion for that I find fascinating is you wanted to do something. And so the need and your giftedness aligned with that passion that I want to do something. I want to be involved to do something to help someone. I can't just sit around all day.
Yeah.
And those two things align for you, and they've aligned since, wherever the need pops up. This thing has grown and adapted like COVID, for food pantry, for food. I mean, that was not rescuing people from their homes, but it is rescuing people in the moment of their need. And so this technology has become fascinating to me. The other thing that I think that's really special about this is I know you work a lot with, the Homeland Security people, or whatever they call it, fire departments. You were talking about Houston Fire, FEMA, all this. I mean, you work with those, although sometimes, as you've shared before, it can be a headache anytime you're dealing with the government. But what's fascinating about this is these are neighbors helping neighbors. You've created a platform where good people from Louisiana, the Cajun Navy, come over, they want to help. Or people in our neighborhood are like, who can we help? We want to help somebody. We helped all the people we know. Who else is out there? And when you created something where neighbors can help neighbors, which is what we talk about. It's kind of like, man, if we can do that, that's what life and faith and spirituality and community is about. Neighbor helping a neighbor. And you created a platform where people could figure out where the need is if they want to help. I think that's really awesome. It's a God thing in the midst of technology and disaster.
Yeah, I like what you said about need, discernment, giftedness. I mean, this is, well, I guess what I tell people, it's, CSR is like 95% of my time, 0% of my income. It is the most expensive hobby I've ever undertaken. Where it's just, and that's with a lot of the volunteers too. I mean, we all call each other, hobbyists, and it's just like, they're buying like $2,500 night vision goggles, and the training is incredibly expensive and all this, and we will undergo all sorts of grief from government agencies, and it's like a million meetings, and you can imagine my attitude towards some of these bureaucratic meetings and the work that goes on behind the scenes, and yet it all falls away in that, like, those like 3 or 4 days where it's just all of a sudden all worth it. And it's strange to look back on. I always try to tell the car story and just sort of, or I always try to like make it clear, like with the Harvey story, rescued 25,000 people, and then I immediately say we did that accidentally, because I think people don't necessarily really believe me, but like When I said that I was mad after I wrecked my car, I was. This is stupid. I thought, and I was going to do the plan. In your deal, your end of the bargain, God, was to not let me wreck my car. This is dumb. And now 5 years later, CSR has helped a lot of people. Obviously, it's been a huge part of my life. But it's other stuff. Like, I met my future wife through it. We're getting married in January, and it was all just. And I would love to be able to say of what, John, you're right. It's actually because I'm real smart, and I saw the need, and I'm just really good at my job. I didn't mean to do any of that.
No.
It just all happened to be. I didn't even mean. I didn't even mean to be riding around on my bike. If it all was according to me and in my plan, none of this would have happened, and it just sort of. But it's just when I look back at particularly the start of it and those days, when it was just a little website to help Chapelwood, where it was that was absolutely rough steps, could have changed the outcome in vastly different ways. And I guess I just try to remind myself of it. Particularly, because sometimes it is frustrating. Sometimes it is why do I do this to myself? We need a lot of volunteers, but it's just, it is insanely rewarding. And just the fact that it's I don't know, that for whatever reason, I got put in this position, in this role, and, my head hurts if I think about it too much, but I'm just grateful that God did.
Yeah.
So how is it accessed? Is it that a rescue like the fire department or a community organization will say during this tragedy or this event we're going to use your application or your website?
It's sort of flexible in many ways. So on the one hand, we have our activation guidelines where it's it's sort of taking a guess at will it be helpful. So it's first, is 911 down? If 911's down, that's a pretty big problem. Because that means people are going to start posting on social media. It's going to start going crazy, and so much of this is about finding a balance. For instance, because when social media starts going crazy, half the stuff on social media is wrong. And so it's going to hurt, but CSR can come in there. There's room for us to play, and kind of calm some of that down.
Okay.
Are there volunteers active? Because there's no volunteers, well, then there's no point in activating. And is there a clear path forward? And so we have an operations team, and we're always sitting there, kind of looking at some of the situations going on and seeing can it be helpful? So that's on the one end. On the other end, some of it just develops naturally. My best asset personally is just my cell phone. It's not a CSR app. It's not a boat. It's not anything or any of that. It's just sort of the relationships that you have with folks. And so a lot of times it could be, to your question, Matt, it could just be emergency manager saying hey, NWS just told us the river's going to flood. We need to get about 500 people out in 24 hours. Can you send a couple boats? Can you send some volunteers? It's just, nothing to do with technology. It's just that connection that you have. The elephant, there's I think there's sometimes they don't necessarily want us running around there, and they did not care very much. Our point back to some of the emergency managers, some of the fire departments who get cranky about it is the volunteers are going to do it anyways. So unless you arrest them, which is not going to look good on you, you might as well work with us because at least we help.
Yeah,
that's great.
I think the volunteers, the volunteer thing is interesting because I remember not only in some conversations you've had in different places, some of your frustrations that you have emergency management personnel. They're like, we don't want you in there. Like even they told us, it's like, you don't need to be going in there. It's dangerous. Well, of course it's dangerous. That's why we're going in there, because there are people in there. And you're not, and it wasn't, when I say they were not going to get them, it wasn't that because they didn't want to go get them. They were tapped out. And in a storm, as you know, if you watch on the news, like the people you were talking about, the volunteers in Ian, and they hunkered down there, the eye gets past. Well, 911 and public safety, they're not going to go until like a certain time that it's safe.
Yeah.
Like they stop deploying.
They go generally when the winds are below 35 miles an hour. This is a big, I mean, at the end of the day, there's always a balance there. Sometimes people, you get two sides of the same coin. People approach us and say, well, why are you out there? FEMA's out there. What do we need you for? It's like, okay, well, first off, FEMA doesn't actually rescue anybody, so wrong right there. Second off, look at the Harvey numbers, for instance. 50,000 calls an hour. Houston Fire Department had 11 boats. That math is never going to work out. So obviously, there can be extremely capable first responders, but you're still going to need help. But then other folks who are looking at us like, oh, look how great CSR is, like, screw FEMA and why do we need the government for? And it's like, well, no, it's not that either. Because yeah, obviously I think we're awesome. We don't have a helicopter, yet, but like, so.
Well, it's public, it's private public partnership. I mean, you have both.
Yeah, but like, for instance, if volunteers are doing some of these cases, it means, U.S. Coast Guard only has so many helicopters, for instance. And so they're able to focus on some of the more priority cases. And it's a lot of it is just taking your assets. And this is the same thing that emergency management does. It's taking your assets, it's looking at them, and it's trying to put them to best use. Because, we have a couple volunteers, and CSR owns these big, massive, awesome trucks. Like they're so cool. But we don't want that. That needs to be used for floodwaters. It running around with 4 miles a gallon doing food deliveries, that doesn't really make sense. And so, anyways, with like a lot of the emergency managers, some of it is like, yeah, this is awesome because you'll particularly see this in the rural areas because, like, we'll work with counties. Right alongside John, I need both of y'all to start fulfilling this role. They are the county's emergency manager, county's barber, and the local preacher running around on a jet ski where it's like, what resources do they have? It's an all volunteer department. Nobody cares about them. The state doesn't care about them. And so like they need those outside resources. Yeah, sometimes the major metropolitan areas look a little bit prickly about it. And some of that's just like, I don't know, it's just.
Well, that's if you live in a big,
very clever trick.
If you live in a big city and you don't know how things work out in the country, like
right
where I come from in South Georgia or even East Texas, a lot of these like you said, a lot of these fire departments are volunteer-based fire departments in some of these real small rural counties and areas.
Yeah, a lot of they're volunteer based. They don't have a ton of money, and then an organization like us is able to come and say, here's 15 folks that are trained in swift water. They have boats. They're self-sufficient. We're not going to ask you for gas. We're not going to ask you for food. Like, pretty much just tell us where to go. Show up, bring a little trailer, and then off to the races. And like the most important thing is just those connections. Like I had a fire chief friend call me up. He was like, this is a strange question, but our pumper broke, and if anybody has a fire right now, this county's screwed. Do you happen to know anybody with a spare pumper? As a matter of fact, I do. Because we have a volunteer who helps train firefighters, and so he has like these massive fire trucks, like 5 of them. And inspiring that connection, and that, sometimes we're just playing middleman, where it's like, fire chief over here needs a spare pumper. Well, there's a spare pumper over in San Antonio, and best of all, it's free. Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you. One of the things I want to point people to, if you want to learn more, you can go to crowdsourcerescue.com. That's the site. It's a really great website, which doesn't surprise me because you're a programmer. But you can also donate if you'd like to support.
I heard the creator is a genius. I made that website.
But you can donate to CrowdSource Rescue. A lot of the things that you've heard, and man, it's just really good that it continues to go on. And the story, to me, the origin story of it, and kind of how it started, and that we share that history together. I mean, it's a thing that I'm always proud for you, and for everybody else that's been a part of it, because we were kind of here when, watching you kind of get this thing up and going, and just we personally, here we're deeply impacted by the success of that. So just proud of you and all the great work you've done, and appreciate you coming and being with us today.
Appreciate y'all having me. And yeah, it's I get all emotional about some of the start of it, because I think, CSR today is much different. We sometimes wonder, where it's like, would CSR today like CSR or Harvey? They think they're a bunch of, wacko, crazy folks. But, we've grown a lot. But the Chapelwood connection has always been really important to me. I grew up at Chapelwood, went there my whole life. I moved for my soon-to-be wife, my lady friend. But it's something I miss dearly. And so that, I don't know, it always feels like Chapelwood is, Chapelwood friends and Chapelwood volunteers and donors, they're always cheering us on, because it's always that just sort of shared history and intertwinedness. And talking about steps, like, I wasn't at your house that night, this would not have been a thing. And so I think so much of the story is just paying attention to what God wants and going for it.
Man, I deeply appreciate you, and thanks for coming on and being with us. Sorry we had some connection problems. They were on our end, not your fault.
Nah, it's all good.
Hey, well, we'll come see you soon in Aggie Land.
All right, I'll see y'all.
All right, brother, we appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Matthew.
He's a good kid.
He is.
I call him a kid. Everybody younger than me is a kid, but
he is a kid. That's amazing what he created on the fly in the need, and how impactful it was. 25,000 people in Harvey. Is that the right? I mean, that seems incredible. That
I'm just amazed, because I don't know anything about programming. The fact that he
could do
put that thing together in a night.
Yeah.
And like within a day. I mean, we were doing rescues for like 5. It was almost not quite a week. It was almost a week. And the reason that a lot of us stopped. Some people kept going, is because the water you had sewage and backup, and the water started getting really dangerous. So if you had a cut, there's a lot of, you could get cut, you could get really bad. Some people got some really bad infection type stuff. So there was a point in time where we just told people, like, we can't kind of do this together anymore officially. If you want to keep going, you can. But man, to see him do it and launch that thing, and to see it just blow up like overnight, is just amazing to me. And the fact that now, if you go on, every time a storm comes, whenever you hear it, I mean, go to that website at CrowdSource Rescue, and you'll see it get activated. Like, you'll see
immediately.
Oh yeah. And you'll see, like, Ian, you'll start seeing it pop up. People are like, I need help. And like I said, there's a window, a period of time where the need far outstrips what emergency management people can do. So I love our public safety, and I love our emergency management, and they do a great job, but they're tapped out. I mean, you're talking about like Ian hitting in Florida, you're talking about multiple counties that are just waylaid, and some people didn't evacuate, or they're stuck, or they couldn't evacuate. I mean, you think about some people that are not mobile,
that's
all sorts of things. And so it's just a powerful story. And I keep going back to that, discernment thing, those 3 legs of the stool, the passion, the need, the passion and the giftedness. And when those things align, then you kind of know what you need to do.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And it sometimes starts from a humble story of, I took the turn too fast and I hit a telephone pole. And that gives birth to something. So don't ever underestimate like something in the moment that spurns you or motivates you to the next thing. You never know what it's going to be.
Yeah. The spirituality of interruption.
Yeah.
You know, we're interrupted into the kingdom often. It's great. Great.
Well, this has been a good time. Make sure if you're listening on the podcast, if you like or subscribe to the podcast, whatever platform you're on, if you're watching it on YouTube, you know, make sure you like and subscribe. It'll also ping you when you subscribe. It'll let you know, hey, there's a new one out. And share it with other people. Ask them to like it and subscribe too. It helps us get
We're likable.
We are likable. So anyway, well, I'm John Stevens.
I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.